الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Bulugh al-Maram min Adiyat al-Ahkam by Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, where he gathered a hadith that relates to Ahkam al-Halal al-Haram. And we have been discussing Kitab al-Tahara, where we had ended the chapter that discusses concerning matter that relates to al-Qada al-Haja. So matters pertaining to toilet manners and etiquettes. We have discussed the hadith that Author rahimahullah had mentioned pertaining to that discussion. So today, inshallah ta'ala, bi'awnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that will be discussing a new chapter. And this chapter that Author rahimahullah have titled the title as Bab Ghusl wa Hukum al-Junub. So the next discussion, or what we'll be embarking upon in discussing those ahkam, the ahkam that relates to Bab al-Ghusl, matter that relates to al-Ghusl, the washing, religious washing. And second, wa Hukum al-Junub, and also a matter that relates to the person is said to be in a state of janaba. So that will be the next discussion, or the things to be covered in this particular, what will be covered over the next series of hadith pertaining to Bab Tahara. So before we go into this discussion, we'll explain concerning Bab Tahara, this matter regarding al-Ghusl wal Hukum al-Junub. They mention regarding concern with the author rahimahullah, Ibn Hajar, he state Bab al-Ghusl wa Hukum al-Junub. So as for what he mentioned here, that they mentioned that as for al-Ghusl, so as an introduction, before we read the hadith, they mentioned that Ghusl and what we discussed regarding the ahkam that relates to al-Ghusl. Also matter regarding concerning mujibat al-Ghusl, so things that require the person to perform al-Ghusl. Also those things that nawaqil al-Ghusl, those things that will nullify, invalidate a person's al-Ghusl, and also the sifa, and also the description of how the person to perform al-Ghusl. So these are the things, and also as we'll discuss regarding the different types of al-Ghusl, where our hukum that is passed and ghusl. So these are of those things that will be covered in this particular chapter regarding Bab al-Ghusl wa Ahkam or Hukum al-Junub. So they mention regarding concerning al-Ghusl, as the ulama have mentioned regarding what is meant by ghusl linguistically, that they mention regarding concerning that al-Ghusl iktisal is a person taking a wash. So taking off a wash is iktisal, that is from ghusl. As for they mention that the word can be pronounced several ways, ghusl, ghasl, wa ghisl. So all of these pronunciation is correct and used differently. So they mention regarding concerning al-Ghusl, that they mention ismul ma, that is the name of the water that is used for taking a wash. So al-Ghusl is the water that is used for taking a wash, according to some of the ulama, and also of those who mention that al-Ghusl iktisal is the person taking that wash. So that meaning that is given. As for ghasl with ghain al-fath al-ghain, that I mentioned that also ism al-fi'l, that it is the name of the act that is being carried out. So ghasl is the act that is being, the person carrying on the act of washing themselves. And also ghisl, that they also mention that it is when the person take a wash, but it will include in the water something like soap, detergent. So if those things are added and used alongside with the water, that is called ghusl. It is called ghusl. So that's concerning what is mentioned by the ulama pertaining to this matter. Some have some difference regarding whether ghusl or ghusl have the same meaning or different meaning. That some mention both at times are used with similar meaning or similar understanding, and those who mention that they have two distinguished meaning. But that's between the ulama on that matter. But overall, that's the general common meaning of those words, as we mentioned, ghusl, ghasl, wa ghisl. Then the next of those matters that they mention regarding concerning this matter, they mention, so you have Bab al-Ghusl. Ghusl is of the hukum of ghusl in general. It varies depending on certain the mujibat, the thing that the reason behind it. At times, ghusl may be of two categories. Ghusl that are said to be at times wajib, compulsory for the person to perform ghusl, and second, at times ghusl is said to be mustahab. So ghusl that falls into ghusl which is wajib would be, as we'll discuss, after the ending of a female menstrual cycle. Ghusl that is said to be wajib will be, as we'll discuss further in detail, if one have intimacy. And then we have ghusl which is said to be mustahab. And amongst those, for example, Omar discussed ghusl, for example, Salatul Eid is mustahab. Then within these types of ghusl, then you find that of those that are mujma alayhi, regarding it being wajib or mustahab, and then you have those that are khilaf bin ulama, whether this type of ghusl is said to be, or this act in performing ghusl is said to be wajib or mustahab. So for example, that what is said to be agreed upon between the ulama, that is wajib, ghusl regarding janaba. So ghusl after janaba, after sexual, after intimacy, then the ulama mention that is agreed upon, is wajib to be done. Then we have another type, where the person also that passed, ordinarily that passed concerning that the person have a discharge of semen, then also that requires ghusl. Then we have a next category of those matters regarding al-ghusl, where the ulama differ regarding, for example, is ghusl yawmul jum'ah wajib or not? Is it wajib or mustahab? So you find a khilaf between the ulama on some of these types of ghusl, and others where they agree upon, and another third category where the ulama also agree upon it being something which is mustahab, agree that it is wajib, and also they disagree on some whether it is classed as wajib or mustahab. As for what they define as ghusl between the ulama, that they mention regarding concerning that al-ghusl, as they state concerning that al-ghusl, that they have defined as they mentioned here, that ghusl, that it is defined as the person اغتسال جميع الجسد, where a person washes the entire body, في صفة مخصوص, in a specific way. So al-ghusl is the person washing, ta'min جميع الجسد بالماء, the person washing his entire body with water, or pouring water on his entire body, بصفة مخصوص, in a specific way. And some mention with arkanil, but with so with that meaning is what is defined as al-ghusl. So the person washing the entire body, his full body, in a specific manner. So that's concerning يتقرب إلى الله, and the person doing so as a way to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ta'abbud lillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a way of getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is al-ghusl. So washing of the entire body in a specific way, seeking to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or so that's concerning al-ghusl. So they mentioned that ghusl, haqiqat al-ghusl, they said haqiqat al-ghusl, that it is jiran al-ma ala jami' al-a'dha. So al-ghusl is a person pouring water, or water being poured, or water running over the entire body. Water pouring or running over the entire body. This is said to be al-ghusl. So they mention next regarding al-ghusl, of those regarding that evidence to prove the permissibility of ghusl, that they mention that you have al-Quran wa sunnah wal ijma. So regarding the mashru'iyat al-ghusl, the permissibility of performing this act of ghusl, that we have text by way of the Quran, also by way of the sunnah, and also by way of ijma, as evidence used for to clarify that this matter is something which is mashru'. It is something which is mashru'. And we'll be discussing some of those ahadith, or some of those matters pertaining to this matter. So the mention regarding concern by way of the permissibility of ghusl, as mentioned by subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 8 mentioned, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ junuban, and if in a state of junuban, a state of janaba, then it mentioned fatahharu, then you should seek purification. I mentioned that purification al-iktisal. So this type of purification of in a state of janaba is the person, or in a sexual impurity, then a person to perform this tahara here is al-ghusl. And also the other hadith that we'll mention regarding that state clarify regarding the permissibility of ghusl, and also al-ijma, as well mentioned later. So that's concerned this matter regarding ghusl. Now inshallah ta'ala, that they mentioned So we now read the hadith and then we start to go through those hadith. We'll read the hadith and then start to go through the hadith. So read the first two hadith in this particular chapter of Bab al-Ghusl, the first two hadith, and then we'll have a discussion around those two hadith بأمر الله سبحانه وتعالى. تفضل.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Chapter 8, Ghusl, Bath, and the ruling regarding the sexually impure. Hadith 94, narrated Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, the water of the ghusl is due to the water of sexual emission, reported by Muslim, and its asl, basic meaning, is in Al-Bukhari. Hadith 95, narrated Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, if one of you sits between the four parts of a woman and has sexual intercourse with her, penetration, ghusl, bath, is obligatory, agreed upon. Muslim added, even if he does not ejaculate.
So these are the hadith that the author, Ibn Hajar alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala, have mentioned in opening discussion regarding ahkam al-ghusl. So as for these first two hadith that he mentioned, some count them as three hadith. So they mentioned, as for the first two hadith, he mentioned first, and Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri ta'ala anhu, قال رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام الماء من الماء رواه مسلم وأصله في البخاري. Then the second hadith he mentioned, so the first hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri. As for the second hadith that is mentioned, he mentioned, and Abi Hurairah ta'ala anhu, قال رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام إذا جلس بين شعبها الأربع ثم جهدها فقد وجبت الغسل متفق عليه. Then he mentioned, added to this, زاد مسلم, يعني Imam Muslim rahimahullah in his Sahih, in lam yunzil. So these are the hadith that are mentioned here by the author Ibn Hajar rahimahullah to discuss of the ahkam that relates to al-ghusl. So as for the first hadith that he mentioned, which is the hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri, then we'll go through, as we'll normally do, the takhrij of the hadith and some discussion around the hadith regarding takhrij, and then we discuss second the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu regarding takhrij of the hadith, and also the hadith that he mentioned, Zada Muslim. We discuss each by way of takhrij by mentioning some of the source of those hadith, and then we'll go into discussion regarding the ahkam that can be taken from these hadith. So as for the first hadith, that hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri anhu, that it is stated regarding concerning this hadith, that's narrated by, as he mentioned here, that rawahu Muslim. That hadith, it is narrated by Imam Muslim rahimahullah in his Sahih. Also the hadith can be found in Ahmed in his Musnad, Ibn Khuzaymah in his Sahih, Abu Awana also in his Sahih. So this hadith, and you'll find, so that's the hadith that is mentioned here of, that is narrated by Imam Muslim. Also the second narration of the hadith, that's also collected by Imam Muslim also, rahimahullah, a second wording of the hadith. So the hadith he mentioned says, it mentioned, al-mahu min al-ma. So that's the hadith we just mentioned in the Muslim, Ahmed, Ibn Khuzaymah, Abu Awana, and others. Another wording of the hadith, and also the hadith, it comes with a qissa. It comes with a story. Another wording of the hadith that is mentioned, where it states in the hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri ta'ala anhu, where also narrated by Imam Muslim, Ahmed, Ibn Hibban, where they mention this hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri, that it states, the Prophet ﷺ said in this hadith, أنه قال إنما الماء من الماء إنما الماء من الماء, that indeed that water, so the word إنما is added. That gives kind of some ta'keed on this particular matter, that so that's concerning those wording of the hadith. Some wording he mentioned here, al-ma min al-ma, and the wording of innama al-ma min al-ma. So that's concerning that hadith that is mentioned here by Imam Muslim rahimahullah. So again, and also others, they have mentioned that also the hadith, also it is, others have mentioned the hadith in the Muslim, the same hadith of Abu Sa'id, Ahmed. Also I've mentioned hadith in the Abu Dawood, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban, Tahawi, and others. So this hadith is then mentioned by many others. As for the qissa, as you said, this hadith also, there's a story that goes with this hadith that some have mentioned regarding concerning the story of this hadith. Also they mention that with this particular hadith, that he mentioned, as Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned, that then he stated, وَأَصْلُهُ فِي Al-Bukhari. أَصْلُهُ فِي الْبُخَارِ. That asl, the source of this hadith, also goes back to Sahih Bukhari. This hadith also can be found in Sahih Bukhari of the essence of this hadith. They mentioned the hadith also of this, the hadith in the Bukhari, Muslim, and also Ibn Majah and others, where the hadith that they mentioned, that it is stated, min tariq, Shu'bah, and Hakam, and Zakwan ibn Saleh, and Abi Sa'id al-Khudri anhu, and Rasulullah عليه السلام قال أرسل إلى رجل من الأنصار. That the Prophet Islam, the story behind this hadith, that the Prophet Islam, that he has sent for someone from the Ansar, فجاءه ورأسه يخطر, and the person came, but there's water coming from, dripping from that person's head. فقال النبي عليه السلام, so the Prophet said to this person, لعلنا أعجلناك, perhaps that we have hastened you, we have hurried you up. فقال, and the person says, نعم. The person responds by saying, yes, that's the case. فقال رسول عليه السلام, the Prophet قال, إذا عجلت, that if you have been hastened, أو قحطت, or somewhat of, you have to, you are still that fully, you're dry, not and he mentioned, فعليك بالوضوء. فعليك بالوضوء. Then he mentioned regarding the hadith in the Muslim or Ibn Majah, then he mentioned of the wording with Muslim and Ibn Majah, قال فلا غسل عليك, that there is no ghusl upon you. وعليك الوضوء, and upon you is wudu. And this hadith, that what is meant by this, I have other narration of the hadith, that so this is the narration of Sahih Bukhari, where this person, that the Prophet ﷺ from the Ansar was called, and the person, he was with his wife, having intimacy with his wife. So when he was called, then he came to the Prophet ﷺ, hurrying, and some national, he was still holding up his Izاره, his clothing, so kind of somewhat, and so the Prophet ﷺ, so he had intimacy with his wife. Then the Prophet ﷺ kind of, we have, we can somewhat, we had interrupted you, so we had interrupted you, and the person kind of starts to mention here, nam. Then the Prophet, they mentioned that in the hadith that, where the person was interrupted in his intimacy with his wife, where he did not end the act. So he had intimacy with his wife, but he did not ejaculate. He did not ejaculate, having intimacy with his wife. So he didn't end the act. So the Prophet told him, when we told him concerning that, when he told him, they were told that, in such a case, then that is not upon you to make al-ghusl. Where they mention, then they mentioned, in some narration of Imam Muslim mentioned, إِنَّمَا الْمَاء مِنَ الْمَاء, or al-ma min al-ma, that water is from water, as we'll discuss that hadith. So that's the story behind the hadith, where a person was having intimacy with his wife, and he was called, he hurried to answer the call of the Prophet ﷺ, but the person did not complete his act of intimacy. So he was inquiring regarding, do I perform ghusl or not, seeing that I did not complete the act of intimacy, where the person, he did not release water. He did not release any form of semen in this particular case. So the Prophet ﷺ told him regarding concerning that, al-ma min al-ma. So that's concerning the story behind this particular hadith. Then that concerns the takhrij of the hadith. Then as for the second hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, that he mentioned regarding concerning the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith, he mentioned muttafaqun alayh, the hadith in the Bukhari and Muslim. Also this hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu can be found in Nasa'i, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Ahmed, Bayhaqi, wa Daraqutni, Ibn Jarud. So that hadith is mentioned by many. So the hadith, and as for he mentioned Zada Muslim, that as for the narration he mentioned Zada Muslim, in lam yunzil, if the person did not ejaculate, if he did not release. That they mentioned that as for that particular narration of the hadith, that it is found with Imam Muslim, and also Bayhaqi in his Sunan, wa Daraqutni, wa Ibn Abdul Barr in his book At-Tamheed. So you have others who have narrated that extra additional wording that is mentioned by Imam Muslim, that he stated in the hadith with the second hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, that even if you did not discharge, you did not release or ejaculated. So as for now, discussion regarding the meaning of the hadith. The first hadith more so the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that al-ma min al-ma. Al-ma min al-ma. That as stated by many of the ulama, that they are mentioned that, as mentioned by Sheikh al-Bassam and others, that they are mentioned that al-ma min al-ma, that water is from water. What is meant by this? As for the first water, al-ma, so it mentioned two waters. The first, al-ma min al-ma, water is from water. As for they mentioned, or water is of water, that they mentioned that as for the first water that is being mentioned, that mean ma al-iktisal. So the water of taking a wash. So taking a wash is required if you have a discharge, a semen discharge. You have to take a ghusl if you have a semen discharge. So that's what it meant by that's meant by that is what it meant by the hadith, that the person that if they have any form of, they take a ghusl in the case that they have a semen discharge. They have a semen discharge. So that's concerning what is meant by that particular hadith. That is what is meant by the hadith. So as for the ahkam, so we now go into that, some of the ahkam that can be taken from this hadith. That al-janaba, janaba, so also to clarify concerning al-janaba, as he mentioned, hukum al-janaba, that al-janaba, with the ulama, it can take on the meaning regarding al-bu'd. Al-janaba take on the meaning regarding al-bu'd. So a person can somewhat being something being distance, or put something being distance away. That's concerned of the meaning linguistic of junub, janaba, of junub being distance, being away. Then I mentioned regarding concern that the word sometimes is used by the ulama regarding of janaba, that of cases regarding concern that that a person is somewhat now distance, or that is now janaba is now there's a barrier from the person doing certain acts of ibadah. The person now is somewhat, so that's the person now janib, yani that is bod min tahara. Now he's somewhat now distance himself from tahara. He has now removed himself from tahara. So the person in a state of janaba, he has now removed himself from a state of being in a state of tahara. And with the person now, he's not allowed to go close to certain things or carry out certain things. So that's concerning janaba. And also they mentioned that janaba also can have the meaning regarding the person that ikhtilat. That a person called khalata, the person also who is intertwined with his wife, or is locked, is fixed with his wife. So that's concerning janaba can have those meanings. As for the first hadith and the ahkam that can be taken from it, then of those ahkam that is mentioned regarding al-janaba, that of the ulama, of those who have explained, they mentioned regarding concern as for which is al-mani, which is the discussion regarding mani, ma min al-ma, that the first ma is that of al-mani, of washing, and the second regarding al-mani. The second is of mani. So they mentioned that regarding concern with this concern that as for al-mani, which is semen, then this with a male, that is something that occurs regarding that they discuss concern that it is something which is white, somewhat kind of creamy thick, and it a discharge that a man experience that comes in a form of is gush forth, and after it has been released, then the person also that he feels fatigueness, comes with it fatigueness. So that's concerning when the personal release of mani. Then for the male, it is something which is a creamy, thick liquid, and also that it comes when a person is like highly sexually aroused, and also it gush forth when it is released, and after this, then the person there's a sense of the person feeling fatigueness. Also, this semen also can have an odor, a distinctive odor. So that's concerning matters relating to what I mentioned as semen. As for a female, that they mention the color of her semen, of the mani of a female, that is something to ask for. It's more like a yellowish in color, raqiq, and also more thin, the opposite of the, different from that of a male. So a male and a female, their semen is somewhat different. The male, white, more white in color, or creamish in color. As for the female, more yellow in color, and also the thickness, the male is more thicker, creamy. As for that of the female, it is much more thinner. As stated by some of the ulama. This also occur, the same thing regarding that, after this, then a sense of fatigue and tiredness, and feeling tired after it been released. As for those masail that are discussed regarding this particular matter, then they mention first, خروج المني يوجب الغسل, that a person who have experience, or a person who releases mani, of this discharge of mani, then require the person performing of ghusl. The person releasing of mani requires the person performing of al-ghusl. They mention regarding concern, and that's something which is, as mentioned by Ibn Qudamah rahimahullah, al-khuruj al-mani dafiq bishahwatin yujib al-ghusl min al-rajul wal-marha fi yaqidha. That, as he mentioned, that the person who have this discharge of semen, and that releases this out of desires, then it requires the person to perform al-ghusl, whether it's a male or a female. And if they are awake, alert, they're awake, أو في نوم, or they're in a state of sleep, if it occurs while they're sleeping, هو قول عامة الفقهاء, and this is the position taken by majority of the ulama. حتى قال الترمذي رحمه الله قال لا نعلم فيه خلاف, that we don't have any difference on this matter regarding the person who experience concerning that the khuruj, the person who have a discharge of mani. Then this is, with this description, the person is awake, or the person is asleep, and it is done out of desire. Then the person is required to perform al-ghusl. They discuss the next matter. They discuss خروج المني لمرض, the person who may have semen discharge, but it is due to either illness or the weather is very cold. The person may experience semen discharge due to either illness, or it is because of the weather being very cold. They mention regarding concern that in that case, regarding concerning that Ahmad ibn Hanbal wa Malik wa Abu Hanifa alayhim rahmatullah ila anna la ghusl alayh, that a person who due to that illness, or second the weather, that they have a semen discharge, then is not upon that person, is not compulsory upon that person to perform ghusl. In that case, the person is not required to perform al-ghusl. And I mentioned regarding concerning the evidence for this, that hadith that is da'if for the Prophet alayhi salam. He mentioned the hadith, إذا فضحت الماء فاغتسل. They have to mention regarding concern that فضح الماء, that the Prophet mentioned فاغتسل, that I mentioned that فضح meaning concern that it comes out intense. That they mentioned regarding concerning that. So they mentioned the hadith is da'if regarding this particular matter, but overall that majority of the ulama, that they take the position that if the person out of illness and the likes, then there is no ghusl upon them. There is no ghusl upon them. And that's the position that a second view is that of the Shafi'iyah and of those of contemporary, of those who kind of somewhat align to that view. As we mentioned, the view that if the person, due to illness or weather, very cold, was to experience semen discharge, that أنه لا غسل عليه, there is no ghusl upon the person. That a view taken by Ahmed, Malik, wa Abu Hanifa, and also of those who align to that view, Ibn Taymiyyah, and of contemporary Shaykh bin Baz and Ibn Uthaymeen. Of contemporary Ibn Baz and Ibn Uthaymeen. The next view on this matter, due to illness or the weather being very harsh, cold, that if the person was to have a semen discharge or a discharge of that nature, that the second opinion that of Imam Shafi, Ahmed fi riwaya ila wujub al-ghusl, that they mentioned the person, if he was to, even during because of illness or the weather, he was to have a discharge of semen, then I mentioned that in such cases it's compulsory upon a person to perform al-ghusl. I prefer. So the person is certain that it is ghusl, then according to them, the person must perform al-ghusl, and also this is the position taken by Ibn Hazm. And I mentioned that the general hadith the Prophet has mentioned, al-ma min al-ma. If the person have any form of discharge, then he performs ghusl. If you have discharge, then he performs ghusl. So if you have any semen discharge, then ghusl is required. So that's concerning that, and that view, Allahu alam, seems, as some ulama mentioned, that seems to be a strong opinion based upon the hadith that is mentioned, the hadith of this chapter, where they mention the hadith Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri, إِنَّمَا الْمَاء مِنَ الْمَاءِ, that water is from water. Our next matter that is discussed regarding this particular discussion between the ulama. So after the discuss concerning the hadith at so regarding concerning the hadith of Abu Hurairah and the second hadith that is mentioned, where the hadith where he mentions إذا جلس بين, and that's not if the man was to sit between the woman's four parts. For they mention that khilaf between ulama as to what is meant by four areas. Of those who mentioned that these four areas, that some mentioned that are arms and our legs, and that's position taken by Ibn Daqiq al-Eid. Of others who mention others' position regarding concerning that what is meant by this is our private area, the four corners of our private area. So you have different aqwal of the ulama, those who mention our arms and our thighs and the likes. So you have different aqwal of the ulama regarding as what is intended. But what they mentioned, they agree that what is meant by this is a qiyana, is a form of but what is meant or intended by the four parts of the lady is intimacy. The person having intimacy with a female. So they mentioned فَقَدْ وَجَبَ الْغُسْلِ, if the person was to sleep with a woman, have intimacy with a woman, be with a woman, and ثُمَّ جَهَدَهَا, and also he put effort, فَقَدْ وَجَبَتْ الْغُسْلِ. Then, as I mentioned, that he had penetration, then ghusl is compulsory. That's the hadith of Abu Hurairah, and also the of Muslim rahimahullah mentioned, وَإِنْ لَمْ يُنْزِلْ, even if he did not have a discharge. So the person did not even, so the person, if the fact that he been with the woman and lie with her, or with a woman and penetrated her, whether he had a discharge or not, then ghusl is compulsory upon him. So the hadith that was mentioned before Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri indicates the mean that the person only perform ghusl if he has a discharge. So that I would say the story behind the hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri, that a person, when the Prophet said to the person that mass water from water, is because he was saying that if you did not add a discharge, you are not to perform. If you have a discharge, then you perform ghusl. Meaning, if you did not have a discharge, you do not perform ghusl. So that's the intended meaning of the hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri. Al-ma min al-ma. If you have a discharge, then you perform ghusl. If you did not have a discharge, you didn't have any ejaculate, then you do not perform ghusl. And as I mentioned, فَعَلَيْكَ وُضُوء, that upon you is wudu, because he did not add a discharge with that woman, his wife. So that's the meaning of those two hadiths. So the first hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri give a meaning regarding that the person only perform ghusl only if he has a discharge. So if you may have intimacy, but the person that did not have a discharge, then there's no ghusl upon them. The second hadith, it indicates that second hadith meaning that the fact that you actually had intimacy with a woman and you penetrated her, whether you had a discharge or not, you perform ghusl. فَقَدْ وَجَبَتْ الْغُسُلُ. It's compulsory upon you to perform al-ghusl. So that's the matter, that is those two hadith. So you find the ulama, they look at those hadith regarding how to harmonize between those hadith, those two hadith in particular. So regarding hadith that seems outwardly may seems to be, those hadith may seems to be ta'arud, that they seem to be opposing each other. One saying that you are to perform ghusl only if you have a discharge, and the other is saying the fact that you penetrated a woman, whether you had a discharge or not, you perform ghusl. So how to harmonize between those two hadiths? So that become a discussion between the ulama. So it's a matter regarding when you find hadith ta'arud, they seem to be what seems from those hadith that they're somewhat in conflict. Then the ulama how to approach the matter, they have approach of one, al-jam bin hadith, to try to combine between those hadith and put each hadith in a particular circumstance. So al-jam bin those hadith, the first approach is how to harmonize between those hadith by how to work with all those hadith by how to combine them together. So you can work with all and not if all of them are authentic. So the first thing regarding this matter is to say that all the hadith, they're authentic. But if they seem authentic hadith seem to be conflicting with each other, then how we are to harmonize and to work with those hadith. So the first approach is al-jam. So the person working all those hadith, each accordingly. If not possible, the person go to an-naskh, which is to see that maybe there's an abrogation that may have occurred. That one hadith precede the other, and the one that came after, then the person now act upon the final hadith, not the first initial hadith, as it might be saying something different. Then if not, and that requires the person know the time frame of those hadith. So regarding a naskh, the person needs to know the time frame of those hadith. Then the third approach concerning a tarjih. If the person, he does not know the time frame of those hadith, the next approach, which is the third approach of the person concerning, that the ulama take the approach that tarjih, where the person might have to take precedent to some hadith over other, act upon others and dismiss others, because it's tarjih, to weigh up and to see which seems to be stronger than the other. So giving precedent over some hadith over others, a tarjih. And the fourth approach, if the person does not have unable to make a tarjih, the fourth approach is tawaqquf. The person, he doesn't take a position. He's still investigating and looking into the matter. So until then, he doesn't come to a final conclusion. So he doesn't take he doesn't take a position until he's able to find ways to come to a conclusion. So those are the four approaches regarding hadith that seems to be that they are conflicting with each other. So regarding concern this matter regarding the matter regarding if a person, the one who penetrates a woman in intimacy, but did not add a discharge. The one who had intimacy, penetration occurred, but there was no discharge. The person did not ejaculated. What's the rukn on that matter? So as for this matter, you have a khilaf between the ulama on this matter. The first position of this on this matter, or view of that of those who take what is said to be what's the meaning of the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the first hadith, where they take the position that the person, that ghusl is not compulsory upon the person until he has a discharge. So even though it was penetration, but there was no discharge, then the person does not perform ghusl, rather they perform wudu. So the person who had penetration of his wife, full penetration, and did not have a discharge, did not ejaculate, then in such cases, they mention that based upon the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the person does not perform ghusl. The part that I mentioned, al-mahu min al-ma, that water is from water, meaning for you to perform ghusl, you must have experienced a discharge. You must have experienced a discharge. As for that view that I mentioned, that, of some of the Sahaba, that view is said to be a view taken by some of the Sahaba, and they mentioned regarding concerning hadith that is mentioned by Imam Muslim, Imam Bukhari, upon some of the Sahaba. They mentioned that in the hadith that is mentioned, and Zayd ibn Khalid al-Juhani, Zayd ibn Khalid al-Juhani radiallahu anhu, قال سألت عثمان ibn Affan, that I asked Uthman ibn Affan, فقال أرأيت إذا جامع الرجل, if what's your opinion on if a man was to have intimacy with his wife, فلم يمني, and he did not. So they mentioned that أرأيت إذا جامع الرجل امرأته, if a man was to have intimacy with his wife, ولم يمني, and he did not add a semen discharge, he did not add a discharge, he did not ejaculate. قال Uthman then respond to the person by saying, يتوضأ, he performs wudu كما يتوضأ للصلاة, he perform wudu as he would perform wudu for salat. ويغسل ذكره, and he does wash his private area. So with Uthman, he mentioned the case that was put to him, the person had intimacy with his wife but did not add any form of discharge or did not ejaculate. Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, he mentioned a person that he performed wudu as he would ordinarily perform wudu for salat, and he would wash his private area. قال Uthman, that Uthman continued by saying, سمعته من رسول الله عليه وسلم, I heard from the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. سألت, they mentioned فسألت عن ذلك, and also it was asked, this was posed to also Ali ibn Abi Talib, Zubair ibn Awam, Talha ibn Ubaydullah, wa Ubay ibn Ka'b, wa amaruhu bidhalik, and they were all instructed regarding this. So all of them asked the Prophet about this, and they were instructed regarding this. So they asked, and this was the answer that they were instructed on this. They mentioned regarding concerning that, with this matter, that you find that also of the Tabi'een who have inclined towards that view. Of those that are mentioned, you have Kal-Amash, as Abu Dawood mentioned. Also of those, Hisham ibn Urwah of that view. Also Dawood al-Zahiri on this matter. But of the ulama who mentioned that this position is da'if. That position regarding this first opinion, that a person, that if you have intimacy with his wife by way of penetration, or intimacy by way of aniyad penetration of the female, but did not ejaculate, that there's no ghusl upon them except they perform wudu. They mentioned that view is somewhat da'if. And they mentioned of this view regarding concern that, as mentioned by Ibn Rajab rahimahullah, that many of the Sahaba who stated that at this position that they change later on. That those Sahaba that are said to have taken that at this opinion, that eventually, that later on, that they made ruju, that they came back from that position. And he mentioned regarding that, where initially that they were acting upon the hadith of al-ma min al-ma. But then later on, they changed that view. That of those, and where they take a position where the person perform al-ghusl, the fact that both two private areas have met, or both private two areas, that the penetration of two private areas, then the male and female private area, then upon the person is ghusl. They mentioned regarding concern of those who made ruju on this matter, Uthman ibn Affan, Ali, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, Zayd ibn Thabit, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Rafi ibn Khadij, that they came back from this opinion. And to the extent you find that in summary that Ibn Munzir rahimahullah ta'ala قال لست أعلم, I do not know of anyone اليوم today بين أهل العلم فيه اختلاف. On this matter of any difference. So that opinion regarding that initial view stating that of those who believe, take the position that there's no ghusl, rather wudu for a person who had intimacy, penetration but did not ejaculate, that only upon them is wudu. That view, as mentioned, that many of those who had this position, that they changed. The second opinion, and they use as the delete the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, إنما الماء من الماء, that the person only perform ghusl when they have ma, which is the first of it is many, is to be done when a person, that ghusl is to be done when a person have experienced al-mani. Ghusl is to be done if the person have any form of ejaculation, which is mani. The second opinion of the ulama is that the qawl taken by jumhur of the ulama. Jumhur of the ulama, that mention أن الغسل يجب بالإيلاج, that a person, the fact that he have penetration occurred, even if he did not ejaculate or add a discharge, then ghusl is wajib. The fact the person at penetration, then that's sufficient for al-ghusl. And I mentioned regarding hashafa, that if the person does as is hashafa, if the person, the circumcised area penetrates, then ghusl is wajib. If the circumcised area, part of the man's penis, enters the woman, then he is to perform al-ghusl. Whether he discharged, ejaculated, or not. And that's the call that is mentioned, that said that's a position taken by Al-Khulafa al-Rashidun. That's the Khulafa, regarding to Al-Khulafa al-Arba, Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, and Ali. That's the position, and Jamaykee as-Sahaba, and majority of the Sahaba were of this opinion, that the fact that the person penetrated, then upon them is ghusl, as long as the up to the circumcised area penetrated the female, then ghusl is required. Ghusl is wajib. And now rahimullah, in his book Al-Majmu' and also Sahih Muslim, he mentioned that mentioned there's an ijma', and others mentioned there's ijma' of the Sahaba on this matter. Ibn al-Arabi, in his explanation of At-Tirmidhi, that mentioned that there's an ijma' between the Sahaba on this matter. But a discussion regarding is this ijma' that is said or mentioned by some of the ulama, is it confirmed, where it is mentioned that some of those of the Salaf, that they took the first opinion, they were at a different opinion on this matter. So overall, that's the position that is mentioned by majority of the ulama, and that seems to be the stronger opinion, that seems. And they mentioned that to justify their view, or to explain their view, that they mentioned regarding concerns, that the explanation of the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, that they mentioned, that said that not one, the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri is mansukh. The hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, that the hadith, that it is the hadith was initially, in the early days of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ, that he allowed that if wudu at intimacy, if one did not add a discharge. So initially, in the early days of Islam, if a person have intimacy, penetration, but did not discharge, then there's no ghusl upon them but wudu. And that's the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. And so that's the mention that matter has been nasakh, was abrogated by the hadith of Abu Hurairah and many other hadith of that nature. So that's concerning that of the thing that they mentioned. And also they mentioned that also another explanation they give, that is an author upon Ibn Abbas anhu, where he mentioned the Tirmidhi rahimahullah, قال عن ابن عباس عبد الله بن عباس رضي الله عنه قال, that باكنا في سنده في ضعف, something been attributed to Ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Abbas, but the sanad fi idaf, we have mentioned that his position was supposed to have been أن ذلك خاصة, that this matter regarding the hadith of Abu Sa'id Khudri is in relation to mention أن ذلك خاص بحال احتلام, that is the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri regarding al-ma, waters from water, is to be understood in light of, in the case of a person who had a wet dream. But we say that's not that explanation or ta'wil of that hadith by Ibn Abbas that narration going back to Ibn Abbas, it is weak. But those who mention that as the case of ihtilam, the person who had a wet dream. The person had a wet dream. But I mentioned that, so that's concerned how they explain the hadith. Then I mentioned that the hadith is what takes precedent, the hadith that comes after the hadith of Abu Hurairah, where the fact that the person, as mentioned in Nasai Muslim, that even the person did not ejaculate or had a discharge, in the fact that he had penetration, then ghusl upon both. So that's concerned that matter. So there's a long discussion between the ulama on this matter, but most have mentioned regarding that this hadith, that they see it as in the early stage of Islam, it was allowed. Then eventually that ruling, it changed, and that's why many of the Sahaba, they came back on that view, because they get to understood that that was the ruling had changed later on to the fact that that as long as you have penetration, then there is ghusl. Penetration, there is ghusl. And they mentioned regarding the next matter, they discussed between the ulama regarding that the next matter, that a fourth matter which is concerned the person who will perceive that that a person that he feels that he's going to have a discharge, the person and is feeling as if he's going to have a discharge, but he can somewhat he hold it back, he stop himself. He hold on, for example, the person might have a discharge, but the person might hold to his penis, private parts, and stop it from stop the discharge from flowing out. Then what's the ruling on that case? So it is coming, but a person can have somewhat held himself by squeezing off his private parts, and it did not release. It was not released. In this case, ulama kind of somewhat I mentioned regarding concerns in this case regarding the person holding and did not release. That and did not release afterwards, so it did not release at all, that I mentioned فَلَا غُسْلَ عَلَيْهِ. Then you find that Jumhur of the ulama take the position that in such case there is no ghusl upon the person, because the discharge, that the semen did not came out. It did not come out of the person, so it was not released. So there is no ghusl upon the person, and that's the view that is taken by Ahmed في رواية. ذهب أحمد في مشهور عنه أنه, and also another narration by Ahmed, يجب عليه غسل, يجب غسل. As he mentioned, he sees that it's impossible, or he cannot foresee a person stopping it from coming out. So he mentions upon a person al-ghusl. So overall, that the correct position of the person, if there was nothing that came out, then there's no ghusl. If nothing came out, then there is no ghusl. As in the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْمَاء مِنَ الْمَاءِ, that the person perform ghusl unless that he actually saw semen, it came out, or it was released. So ma min al-ma would apply in this particular case. And that's the view that is taken that by Ibn Taymiyyah and also of contemporary Ibn Uthaymeen are of that view. And next matter that we'll end with, regarding concerning the exercise of a person that he had a discharge, that after took his ghusl, or after he took his ghusl, then he find that he still have semen that is that's still there. So the person took a bath, but after taking their ghusl, they find themselves at a discharge of semen. This is after their ghusl. So the person have intimacy with their wife, for example, then they took their ghusl, then after taking their ghusl, later on they find a discharge of semen. They mention concerning what's the hukum regarding, is the person required what to be done in such case. ذهب الشافعية إمام شافعي رحمه الله والليث بن سعد وأحمد في الرواية وابن هزم إلى أن عليه غسل آخر. That in this case the person took their wash after janaba, after intimacy, he took his wash, but then after taking his ghusl, then the person still experienced a discharge. He still see discharge of semen after his ghusl. Shafi, Layth ibn Sa'ad, Ahmed for riwayah, Ibn Hazm are of the opinion that the person is to take another ghusl, to repeat his ghusl. They take the position that they mentioned. Why? Because the person have experienced this ma is many, is semen. So the fact that is out, then a person required to perform ghusl once again. He's required to perform ghusl once again. The second opinion on this matter is the position taken by Imam Malik, Sufyan al-Thawri, Ishaq ibn Rahuya, and also Mashhur and Ahmed al-Hanbal, أنه لا غسل عليه, that there is no ghusl to be performed again. So the person does not need to repeat the ghusl again. يكفيه الوضوء, that is sufficient for the person to perform wudu, but they do not require to perform ghusl. That's a position by, we said, by Imam Malik, Sufyan al-Thawri, Ishaq, and also another view of Imam Ahmad, that the person in this case do not need to repeat their ghusl once again. It is sufficient for them to perform al-ghusl. And others have mentioned, other of the ulama, they mentioned, Ibn Mundhir mentioned, is the call of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ibn Abbas, Ata, Zuhri, and others. A third opinion of ذهب أبو حنيفة رحمه الله في الرواية, again also Ahmed bin Hanbal, that I mentioned لأنه, that I mentioned their position is إلى أنه, that the person in this case, إن كان لم يبل, if the person did not urinate, if the person did not urinate بعد غسل, after performing ghusl, ثم خرج مني, then the mani, it came out. So the person took ghusl, he did not urinate, but then the semen discharge after ghusl. فلا غسل عليه, they mentioned there is no ghusl upon him. There's no ghusl upon him. Then I mentioned لأنه بقي, that's what remains is just same, it's just remnants, remains of the semen from before. So it's still coming out. So that is still counted as one. So there's no ghusl upon him again, because all of that is seen as the same semen. Then I mentioned that so you have that view taken by some of the ulama, where those who mentioned that and if that's not the case, the person took the ghusl but did not and he urinate. So the first dimension, the person took the ghusl but did not urinate, then he had again semen discharge, that is taken as that there is no ghusl. But if the person urinated and then after he took his ghusl, then urinated, then after urinating, passing urine, he had a discharge of semen. Then I mentioned in that case, yajib al-ghusl. In that case, the person perform al-ghusl. So that's the view of the ulama, and that's the view that is, so you have those views of the ulama on that particular matter, on this discussion. They mentioned that what seemed to be sahih, according to the mention sahih, أن الخروج مني بعد اغتسال دون عمل شيء من مسبيات. خروج المني يدل على أنه بقية المني الأول الذي اغتسل منه. That means that there's an overall person that is still just remains of the semen of previous. So there is no ghusl upon the person. There is no ghusl upon the person in this particular case, as it does delay. Some of the semen does have delay in coming out. So in that case, the person is not required to perform al-ghusl. So that's concerning that particular matter, or some of those matters that are discussed on this. I would just add a next matter. They mentioned that to add this, if a female after having her intimacy and she takes her bath, and after she takes her bath, that some of the semen of the man that is inside that, that after her bath, that it's still flowing from her or running out of her. So the woman, after intimacy, she have taken her bath, then after she finds some discharge of semen coming from her. In that case, and so what to be done in that case? It is mentioned regarding Janah and some of the ulama, amongst them Hasan al-Basri, أنه قال تغتسل, that Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah, he ordered that a woman should in that case perform ghusl again. As I mentioned, that because that's it is ghusl that is coming from her, and perhaps it could be from her. As for a second opinion with the ulama, they mention Qatada wa Uzahi wa Ahmed wa Ishaq ila annahu la ghusl alayh, that there is no ghusl upon her. فعليها الوضوء, but upon her perform al-wudu. And Allahu alam, that so you have that second view, that in the case of this woman who after her ghusl she still having discharge of semen, then upon her is not a must, she does not perform ghusl. It's for upon her to kind of wash that area and perform wudu. Then a third view of Ibn Hazm rahimullah that he mentioned, ila annahu la wudu alayha wa la ghusl, that Ibn Hazm rahimullah, that there is nothing upon her, she doesn't perform ghusl nor wudu, just wash that area. That's the position. So say ahwath qawl athani, best is qawl athani, for her to renew her wudu. But as to say that ghusl is required, then that's the view that is taken by Hasan al-Basri, and Ibn Hazm rahimullah view is there's nothing at all upon her, that's maybe to wash that area, because after performing al-ghusl, that's just remnants of the semen, so that just needs to be cleaned, but there nothing upon her, obliged upon her to perform wudu, nor to perform al-ghusl. So that's concerning of those masail that is mentioned by the ulama regarding those two hadith, or those hadith that we are discussing. So inshallah ta'ala, in the next coming lecture session, we discuss also other masail that relates to these hadith. We discuss other masail that relates to these particular hadith. Wa billahi ta'ala tawfiq.